Yeah, so we recently spoke about an article that I wrote about the road to abolition and the Tin for Justice movement, which you're the one of the co-creators or co-founders of.
Yeah, came out great.
Yeah, thanks, man. Do you want to start by just introducing yourself to listeners and telling everyone a little bit about what you're about?
Sure. First, I'll introduce my cat, whose tail you saw. My wife breeds cats. We have
Oh,
8, and
sure.
we're about to have 10.
Oh, wow.
My name is Awkward. I'm one of the co-founders of 10 Demands, the coalition that created 10 for Justice. I've been an activist for decades, focused on criminal justice and racial justice for the last 20 years. I'm also a hip hop artist, and I have a new song coming out celebrating 10 for Justice that'll be called 10 Demands, focusing on abolition of police and prisons and the system that we have today in America that we're looking to dismantle.
Cool.
Yeah, there's a long tradition, obviously, in hip hop of using the mic as a means of, political change. If you go back to like the, OGs of hip hop, you have guys like Chuck D, but you also have a Tribe Called Quest and all the conscious rappers that came up in the '90s. What are your inspirations as a musician and as a rapper?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, as far as like people that influenced me from a political perspective, Chuck D is definitely one of them. I first heard rap music when I was a little kid, like most people of my generation. And, it just hit me in a way that, my parents' political rock music didn't. While I, certainly grew up, my mom was an activist mother, with Motown and some of the more like folk stuff like Bob Dylan. There was just something about the feel of hip hop that spoke to me. And actually Chuck D many years later would end up co-signing my work and my music, so that was a really momentous thing. There are some others too, but he definitely stands out, so that was a good call.
Oh,
Yeah,
right on.
that's dope. I also heard you collaborated with like Occupy the Hood and some other organizations in New York
Yeah.
City. Want to tell us a little bit about that and how that went?
Yeah, like 10 Demands is almost like a sequel to the song that I wrote back in, the early 2010s. It was called Throw Away the Key, and I did a music video that was sponsored by Occupy the Hood and the New York Civil Liberties Union. And that was basically focusing on the system that creates, the kind of the intersecting systems that create the injustice and inequality that we have today. It focused on police brutality and mass incarceration. It was part of my 100% for charity global hip hop project Worldview. And now, like 6 years later, nothing has changed. In fact, it seems like things are only getting worse. But on a positive note, we're seeing a lot more push from a lot wider of a array of people for at least defunding the police. So I consider that great progress, and defunding the police is kind of step one.
Yeah.
Our starting point for 10 for Justice, and one of the 10 demands that I'll be talking about in this follow-up that's more focused on what I think we should do about changing the system so that it actually is justice for all.
And for people who aren't familiar, could you just go ahead and lay out what are the 10 demands for justice?
Sure. We kind of 10 Demands as a group kind of formed organically in late May, and we spent about a month iterating and editing, and the end of June we released 10 demands that we've called 10 for Justice, that we based on a ton of my personal experience being in prisons, protesting, lobbying Congress for justice, as well as a ton of third-party research that we did and conferring with leaders of the Black community, the Indigenous community, and as well as other abolitionists. The 10 demands, are very comprehensive. There are a ton of actionable steps, specific demands that we are making right now that we believe can be implemented right now, all leading kind of on the road to full abolition. But I'll just run down the kind of titles of each of the demands, and you can always go to 10forjustice.com and get into further details both about what each demand entails as well as how we kind of envision a post-abolition society. So the first one, as I said, is our starting point, defunding the police and allocating those resources to impacted communities. Because it's not enough to just defund the police and put that money back to places it doesn't belong. It needs to go to the communities that have been, all communities, but in particular those that have been, most drastically and harmfully impacted. Number two is demilitarizing the police, which goes hand in hand with defunding. One of the very clear ways we can defund is by making it so that, for example, small rural towns don't have tanks and grenade launchers. Number three is eliminating discriminatory policing, prosecution, and sentencing. This is something that when we don't have cops, obviously will not be an issue. But in the meantime, as I said, there are a lot of actions that can be taken right now. For example, decriminalizing poverty, ending broken windows policing and stop and frisk, legalizing drugs and legalizing sex work. Number four is instituting complete law enforcement transparency and accountability. Every day I'm sharing through social media another example of police murder or police brutality, and they get away with it. Everyone's focused on Breonna Taylor, as they should be. She's one of many, and as we know, only one of the four officers has been fired. None of them have been held accountable. And by ensuring that all police records, all police data, as long as police exist, are out there, along with the next demand, we can hold them accountable. And that next demand is to independently investigate all police crimes and abuses of power. So not in a carceral sense, not trying to create another system of punitive response to injustice, but creating kind of a national review board with community level oversight to investigate officers and immediately fire those who are found guilty. Obviously, too, a great way of working toward abolishing police is immediately dismantling any department that violates civil rights. Those can be the first to go, and there'd be no issue there. Number six is installing community representation, oversight, and safety measures. In stark contrast to some of the community policing programs that have been developed and have kind of just led to more trouble, we want to actually invest in the communities themselves. With the safety measures, with intervention and violence prevention, skills-based education, things like that. Number seven, we saw again today an example in Los Angeles where the LAPD ripped a Black man with disabilities out of his wheelchair and broke his wheelchair for peacefully protesting. Things have been a lot worse for other people. They've been beaten, pepper sprayed, gassed, shot, killed, run over by police cars. Tons of people have been arrested. They're stacking charges against them, multiple felonies. And so number seven is, about repealing anti-protest laws, ending counter-protest violence, and freeing all of those people in prison or jail for exercising their constitutional rights. Number eight is apologizing and providing reparations. This is something that the Indigenous community and a number of Black leaders really highly valued, and so something we, really were intent on including, and something that kind of differentiates us from other equally ambitious and positive efforts out there to abolish, because none of the others really focus the way we do on Indigenous people and their unique needs, and also including a written and publicly read apology and actual monetary reparations for all descendants of African, all Black descendants of Africans in this country, as well as the descendants of those who were here before the white Europeans, and all those who are victims of police violence and racial discrimination. Number 9 is end the war on drugs. That's pretty cut and dry, but a big part of it is not just kind of saying drugs are legal, but ending the criminalization of drug use and drug addiction, and creating alternatives to actually treat addiction, as well as mental health and other health needs. So free healthcare for all, independent of how wealthy or not you are. And number 10 is ending carceral punishment. We believe that there should be no prisons, but in an immediate perspective, we could free everyone in jails and prisons and youth facilities and detention centers who are elderly and disabled, immunocompromised, all nonviolent offenders, undocumented immigrants who are criminalized just for being here, criminalized survivors, women who are locked away for defending themselves against their abusers, and certainly all those held on bail or for parole violations. We believe we should immediately end all prison construction, close all local jails, eliminate the prison industrial complex, closing private prisons, and terminating public-private contracts that allow the same corporations that give to certain politicians to profit off of incarceration. As we know, kind of capitalism and mass incarceration are inextricably tied, and has been, since slavery and, the chain gangs after that. So a huge part of this is removing the profit motive. Racism isn't going to go away, but there are certainly real actionable things that can be done to kind of, prevent racism from being systemically applied.
Yeah, we were just talking with Jabari Briesport, who's actually running for state senate in New York City in Brooklyn, and he said something similar, which reminded me. He said basically he believes strongly that at least 3 out of 4 people that are currently in prison could be freed. And yeah, it really brings to mind that this isn't just a battle about changing the way we do criminal justice or anything like that, but it's also a battle of changing people's mind, the way they think about the very concept of criminality. Like you said, if we were to decriminalize all drugs, and by the very nature that would, half the people wouldn't even be in prison anymore. And have you found that it's been tough to convince people that, things that they have been taught their entire lives to believe are crimes are actually not something that people deserve to be in jail for?
Yeah, absolutely. In Angela Davis's book, Our Prison's Obsolete, she talks a lot about the fact that, this is something that was created, initially created as kind of an improvement over, the public stonings and hangings that they were doing before. And the intention was penitence. There was a time when prison was meant to rehabilitate, but for a long time that hasn't been the case. That's evident by making it so that people in prison can't benefit from Pell Grants to get higher education. It's very clear what prison is for. It's for removing the criminalized communities and earning money off of their backs, through slave labor. But certainly trying to explain to someone that they were born with this concept of crime and punishment, and that is a creation and it doesn't have to be that way. Trying to convince people to open their minds and think outside the prison box is definitely the hardest part. And, we constantly get, the same questions, like, what do we do about, the murderers and the rapists. And, there's an actual answer for that. And that's why on 10forjustice.com, we have a how it works page. And, we really spell out a lot of this stuff. So in addition to things I kind of hinted at before, where, we want to put in place of the current system, education and intervention, wellness checks and peacekeepers instead of, militarized police, patrolling, sorry. We, there's also some things that people just simply don't know that, I think are pretty convincing. Research has shown that being stopped by police, regardless of whether you had prior criminal past, actually predicts an increase in future criminal behavior. So it's not only not stopping criminality, it's creating more of it. You mentioned decriminalizing drug use, but also sex workers and immigrants. We would drastically reduce the incarcerated population and the need for police, as well as, decriminalizing other things around poverty. By abolishing police, we would actually eliminate 1/3 of all stranger murders in this country. And that sounds odd, but if you look at the research, you look at the statistics, the majority of murders as well as other crimes are committed by people against people they know. So if you take the small percentage of murders that actually happen in this country by people who don't know each other, 1/3 of them are committed by police. So just by removing police, we're removing murder. So it's actually the opposite of what people think. And finally, there's also evidence that, even victims of crime want investments in education, jobs, and drug and mental health treatment, not prisons and jails. So the whole concept of we're doing this for the victims, this is what they want, that has been shown to be untrue. We don't want anarchy. We don't want lack of consequences. We want different consequences. We want community structured consequences where instead of deeming someone evil or deeming them a criminal, they're thought of more as a debtor, someone who is liable based on their human duty to take responsibility for their acts and, to assume the duty of repair. So that's why, what we envision includes, in addition to education and intervention and healthcare and all of that, it involves reparative justice and rehabilitation and mediation, because honestly, this benefits the victims, it benefits the perpetrators who in the vast majority of cases were victims themselves, and it benefits the greater society at a community level, which kind of, unlike trickle-down economics, this kind of pushes out, it benefits the entire society.
You mentioned Angela Davis, who everybody who listens to the podcast knows is obviously a tremendous hero of mine. But one of her other, quotes that stands out to me is, she called reform through electoral politics a liberal's panacea. She said it was never going to happen. And it kind of rings even more true now as we look at our current, general election options between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, the man who literally architected the, system of mass incarceration that we're discussing, how to abolish. I just wondered what your thoughts are on that, especially as, a white guy who's probably concerned with harm reduction, which is typically the argument that people are met with on the left as the justification for voting for somebody who is as, corrupt and, just disgraceful as Joe Biden.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with you there. So, the way that I look at it is, I look at it as there could be two options. I don't think a Joe Biden presidency would see, someone tweeting all day inciting violence and telling neo-Nazis to actually go become vigilantes and try to kill Antifa, So if you look at it that way, a Joe Biden presidency might be an improvement. But on the other hand, we are at a time in our country where we have the biggest social justice movement in our history. There are people protesting for months in all 50 states, which, it's bigger than the civil rights movement. And, we, I think, as a society needed a Malcolm X to get what Martin Luther King was looking for, from a neoliberal perspective. I mean, a lot of us know that Martin Luther King was against capitalism and was a lot deeper and more radical than people give him credit for. But what the masses and the power holders saw from Martin Luther King were the peaceful marches, and we were able to pass civil rights legislation, not just because, or probably not because we thought it was the right thing to do, the collective we and, the 1%. It was because they were terrified of the Black Panther Party and Malcolm X. So in a way, like, I think that, being an abolitionist may seem crazy to some people, but if we can make drastic change because they're terrified of me, that's great. And likewise, in a weird way, like, because of how far we've come and how angry everybody is, and how widespread the knowledge of police brutality and murder and corruption is, it's possible. And there's a whole group of people who literally like have a philosophy around this, that it might actually be better in the long run to have 4 more years of Trump, because it is so terrible that like the revolution might actually come.
Yeah.
We might be able to literally end this, racist capitalist system and start over because he's so horrible.
I was actually going to follow up and ask that. Do you worry that under a Joe Biden presidency that all the activist energy is just going to, evaporate, leave the room? I remember under Obama, we were still bombing countries, gassing protesters at Standing Rock. It didn't seem like there was nearly as much outrage. And I feel like a big part of the reason why we did see the people taking to the streets is that it was in reaction to Donald Trump. So, I agree that obviously we don't want a fascist in the White House who's tweeting about how we need to kill Antifa and stuff. But at the same time, I worry that under a Joe Biden presidency, that the activist left and, the left in general is just going to fall asleep and pretend that everything's okay for 4 years until we get, President Tucker Carlson or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, people like myself, down ballot progressives like Jason Call, who's running in Washington, are so essential, because there is a possibility, and it's not, a weak one, that people will be mollified by a Joe Biden win. Because the majority of people, no matter how much effort we put into sharing the truth, still don't know what a real, like, what he really is, what he stood for decades, and what harm he's already caused, and the lies he's told, and all of it. So I mean, I think certainly, but I think like moderates and centrists and all of that, like, they're going to be happy. Like the people who lean right and like are not fascists, I can't agree with them about anything, and I never have. But at the very least, I can, honor them for not liking Donald Trump. Maybe they'll be a little happy that Biden has taken over, because they realize how much closer he is to their Republican ideals than an all-out fascist. The left is complicated. I mean, I don't know how big the true left is. And this will be a great test for us. If simply having a Democrat, someone with a D next to his name, in the White House kind of kills all of the momentum, that would say a lot about not only what we know the Democrats to be, weak and ineffective, but the left too. I don't consider the Democratic Party left. When I think of left, I think of, radicals and true progressives, who are looking for the same kinds of fundamental change that I am. I would hope that we already know the truth about Biden, and, we'll be equally as angry. But I do think that, like, the left right now, I should say, like, the white left, they are supporting a cause and a mission and an initiative and a movement that is not even political. To me, if you're black, brown, LGBTQ, disabled, like if you're not like a rich, white, conservative Christian male, if you think that this country is good, if you like the way it's been running forever, if you think like Biden or Trump is good, then like, I don't know what to tell you, but like, it blows my mind when, every once in a while, a black man is like, Trump's been great for us. Like, I don't even know what to say to that. Like, I believe that this movement that the white left is supporting is a black movement, a movement of, people of color who are discriminately targeted and, most often the victims of police violence and police murder. I can't, even though they all shockingly voted for Biden instead of Bernie, I think they're going to know that no matter who the president is, the police aren't changing. Mass incarceration isn't changing because they witness it every day in their communities. Like they see people stopped and frisked, beaten, disappeared, and they see the impact that has on families and on their communities. Long story short, I hope that it makes no difference at all, no matter who the president is, in terms of our push for change.
Right. Something I wanted to ask you too is, we often see the left kind of refer to other countries, other beacons of social democracy, Scandinavia, for example, as a kind of example of how we could improve things here domestically with healthcare, for example. We often see Bernie made the case often, look at Canada, just our neighbors to the north, a few miles up, look how much better they have it. Have you found embracing similar tactics with your own quest for police reform has been useful, maybe pointing to the kinder, more rehabilitative prisons that you find somewhere in Finland or somewhere in Scandinavia?
First, I'll just preface it all by saying I don't know enough about other countries to make it the type of informed decision that I feel very comfortable making about things here in this country.
Yeah.
But having said that, what I do know is that in a lot of these countries, they do have prison systems along with other rehabilitative systems and healthcare systems and educational systems, things where, these radical leftists are fighting for here, they've had there forever. And it does work better, and it's more humanist.
Yeah, they have better societies in every metric, happier people, less crime, less violence, all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know in other countries that are similar-ish to ours in a lot of ways demographically, if they they don't have a huge NRA, they don't have a ton of people with guns, and they don't have, and the police are not armed with weapons like that. There's a lot less violence and there's a lot less murder and a lot less crime. So yes, I do know all of that. I think there's a lot more learning that I could do to get some more ideas as to how we can build a post-abolition society here. But I fundamentally believe that prison is not the answer. And I don't believe in police or prison reform. Any reforms that might be included in the 10 demands are there as stepping stones to what we believe is the only solution, and that is to not have either.
Yeah, I want to ask you about one of those stepping stones. Recently, there was a court ruling that declared half of Oklahoma indigenous land, and therefore the police would not be able to prosecute indigenous peoples in that land area. Do you think that'll set a precedent for other native lands to be able to kind of exercise the same right? And do you think that that'll have a benefit for the indigenous community? Obviously, there's been a huge and unspoken history of the police exploiting, brutalizing indigenous communities, indigenous women being exploited, exposed to sexual harm and violence, and not being prosecuted because it took place in areas. What your thoughts on it, if you think that'll be an improvement for the indigenous community, and if you think that's a positive stepping stone?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely think overall it's positive because that's what they want. The First Nations, want all of their treaties, including those that weren't ratified, to be honored in perpetuity. They want self-determination. They want all of their stolen land returned. They want sovereignty. So I think that if they are able to kind of live in societies within our larger society and govern themselves, this is a great stepping stone. Half-ass measures, though, like with anything else, like, are not necessarily going to work. There are a lot of issues in, Native communities that have been caused by everything that's happened to them since Christopher Columbus. So do I think that this on its own is the solution? No, but it's similar to, like, you can't just defund the police. You have to reallocate those resources. So in 10 for Justice, one of the 10 Demands creators, or one of the 10 Demands members and 10 for Justice creators, is an Indigenous person, who spoke in great length with, leaders in her community so that we could incorporate this not only with the right requirements, but even with the right language, because it's specific how they want to be referred, and that's important. So we were very careful about that, because I think more than any other segment of our society, they are completely ignored and denied rights and what they deserve. So I do know what they're, we have included what they're looking for, and it does look a little different from what we're asking for the rest of the country. But one of those things being self-determination and self-governance, I think it was a huge victory to have that happen in Oklahoma, and I do certainly hope that it sets a precedent on a long path toward, giving the hundreds of tribal nations what they're looking for.
Yeah, I think it's awesome that you guys are including those Indigenous issues in the platform at 10 for Justice, because I've long hoped that there would be an Indigenous Lives Matter movement or something that could equal the impact and visibility of the Black Lives Matter movement. Because like Zach said, it's just one of the most their struggle has been so roundly ignored and often just completely let go by the wayside. So thank you for talking about that. Is there anything else you wanted to? Sorry, what was that?
Well, about that, I was just going to say that I really valued having Cheyenne as a part of our group, and I think that's another thing that distinguishes the work that we did was, we really are multiracial and multicultural. We come from all different parts of the country, all different backgrounds, and have all these different experiences and different connections, that we were able to bring to the table. And I think that's why it is so comprehensive, so all-inclusive. And I think also why, it is more practical in a lot of senses. It's not just these kind of vague concepts. It is, like I've said before, like specific things that can be implemented, on the local, on the state, and on the national level. So now it's a matter of getting them out there as much as we can, which, we're trying to do by arming protesters on the grounds, on the streets, with our flyers, and also, putting together an email and letter campaign. So all of the, sitting congressional leaders who are not aware of this yet actually get it in their inbox and understand exactly what we're demanding.
We really thank you for taking the time to come on and chat with us today, man. We'd love to have you back on, or you or anybody else from your organization for that matter. So, thank you so much.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Right now, in addition, we're working on 10 for Health and 10 for Education.
Oh, cool.
Given my background with fighting for racial and social justice, I have I have some understandings of these issues as they relate to the larger issues, but I am not going to be the right representative probably for our next set of demands. And that's what separates 10 Demands from 10 for Justice, is 10 Demands as a group has this goal of creating a number of lists of 10 demands that when they all intersect can create this kind of society that I'm talking about. So they'll go into greater detail when it comes to education and health. And I'm hoping, at that time, maybe one of the other members feels comfortable Because of my background doing music and being a public figure, I've done all of the interviews, but I'd love to have someone else come on and share their thoughts with you as well.
Oh
So,
yeah, we would absolutely love to talk to literally anyone else to keep hearing more about your guys' project and message and everything. We think it's what you're doing is great.
thank you.
And there will be a link to your guys' website in the description. So for anybody that wants to check it out and find more, it'll be right down there.
Beautiful. I really appreciate it, guys. The article was great. Your questions during this interview were great. And you can always, anyone who has any questions, like there's ways to contact us on the site. And it's also 10 Demands, TEN Demands on Twitter if you want to reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions that are, actual questions and not, just asking things that are intended to create problems.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us today, Awkward.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much.
Thanks a lot.
Take
Peace.
care.